Hello, everyone. My name is Janet Archer. I'm the Chief Executive of Edinburgh Printmakers. Welcome to the Art of Printmaking, and I'm delighted to have with me this evening Emma Nicolson, who's the Head of Creative Programmes at the Royal Botanic Gardens of Edinburgh, and Sonia Mehra Chawla, who's a digital artist and researcher who's with us from New Delhi in India tonight. Before we start, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Edinburgh Printmakers. Edinburgh Printmakers was established in 1967. It was the first open access studio in Britain. We play a role in connecting artists to studios, workshops, and creative spaces nationally and internationally, enabling high quality printmaking and innovation in print practice. Edinburgh Printmakers is at an exciting point in its development after a successful move in spring 2019 to a new home at Castle Mills, which is a beautifully restored heritage building in Fountain Bridge, which formerly home to the North British Rubber Company, once part of a thriving industrial community in Edinburgh. And at Castle Mills, we've significantly expanded our offer with new studios and galleries, a dynamic programme of exhibitions, events and courses, accommodation for visiting artists, an archive, shop selling original prints and handmade products. We hire space for meetings, events and learning activities, and have a cafe and community garden. And we're now fully open from Tuesdays to Sundays. The Art of Printmaking is a series. It's taking place over 6 weeks this autumn. It reflects back on our exhibitions programme during the summer festival period and ahead to our forthcoming programme. It's running on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. each week. And the series will close with an in-depth tour around our print studio in 2 weeks' time. So a couple of housekeeping points. The event's being recorded and it'll be uploaded to our YouTube channel and website after tonight. So please note the chat's disabled. You should use the Q&A to post any questions and feel free to do this at any time during the discussion and they'll be answered towards the end of the event. And so on to introducing our two very special guests. Emma Nicolson is Head of Creative Programmes at the Royal Botanic Gardens Edinburgh, where she leads on the development of a new art strategy, the creation of innovative exhibitions and interpretive opportunities that engage with art, nature, science and the environment in the unique context of RGBE. In 2020, she launched Climate House and formed a collaboration with the Serpentine Galleries through the formation of the General Ecology Network. Prior to this, she was the founding director of the award-winning Atlas Arts, based on the Isle of Skye. And during her tenure with Atlas, she undertook a 2-year guest curator role with Tekersheva Museum and Arts Centre in North Uist. She's delivered large-scale commissions, exhibitions, and music and performance programmes. Emma is a cultural leader and innovator with a strong track record of creative thinking, development, and delivering strategic vision and change, and with particular interest in developing programming that helps engender individual and societal change. She's committed to partnership working with and for artists, creative professionals and communities, encouraging creative and critical thinking with local as well as national and international audiences. Emma's been involved in the visual arts for over 20 years. She's worked with leading cultural institutions in Scotland, England, Ireland and Australia, including the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney and the National Galleries of Scotland and Fife Council. Sonia Mehra Chawla is a visual artist and researcher based in New Delhi, India. She received her BFA and MFA in Fine Arts from Delhi University's College of Art in New Delhi, India. Sonia has an interdisciplinary practice as an artist, photographer and researcher. Working at the intersection of art, science and technology, the artistic practice explores notions of ecology, sustainability and conservation. Very apt during this time as we lead up to COP. Chawla is a fellow and awardee of the Charles Wallace India Trust of the British Council. She's a fellow of the International Art and Science Programme Institute, by Khoj, India and the Wellcome Trust, DBT India Alliance. Chawla was awarded a long-term international fellowship and residency in the area of social science by Akademie Schloss Solitude, Germany in 2019 for the Art, Science and Business Programme of the Academy. Her forthcoming projects include Driving the Human, a project initiated by ZKM, Music Centre for Art and Media, Karlsruhe Architect, National Academy of Science and Engineering, Germany, Forecast Berlin, and the Karlsruhe University of Arts and Design, Germany, and Earth Gardens, a research-based multimedia project at Akademie Schloss Solitude, Germany. In collaboration with Botanische Garten and Botanische Museum, Berlin, Sonia Mehra Chawla's exhibition Entanglements of Time and Tide is currently showing at Castle Mills until 12th of November, and I can't recommend it enough. So I'm going to hand over to Emma now, who is going to lead this conversation with Sonia.
Thank you very much, Janet. Thank you for your warm introduction and welcome. And congratulations, Sonia, on a remarkable show you have done and all the incredible research behind it. I'm really fascinated to know more about the inspiration between entanglements of time and tide and how it came about. And I think you've prepared something for us, haven't you?
I have prepared a presentation, so I think I'll jump right into it. But before that, I would just like to say, firstly, a very warm welcome to everyone who's joining us this evening, and a special warm welcome to Janet and to Emma, to Edinburgh Printmakers for hosting not only the exhibition, but this event today. But I'd also like to thank the partners whose contribution has been nothing short of absolutely amazing in very, very difficult times and situations. So Ascus Art and Science, Edinburgh, as well as Marine Scotland, and also Professor Colin Moffat, their contributions have been amazing to the project. So I'm just going to jump right into the presentation right now. All right, so Entanglements of Time and Tide has been an incredible journey and a deeply transformative experience for me. This project is the result of a 3-year period of research and collaboration facilitated by Edinburgh Printmakers way back in 2018. And then subsequently, this project was supported by Marine Scotland, Professor Colin Moffat, Creative Scotland, and Ascus Art and Science through intensive artist residencies in 2019 at the Marine Laboratory of the Scottish Government in Aberdeen, at Edinburgh Printmakers, which was an intensive print residency, and as well as an art science residency at the Ascus Laboratory in Summer Hall in Edinburgh in 2019. In addition, the multimedia exhibition has been informed by various field visits to Aberdeen, Fraserburgh, Peterhead, and Stonehaven on the northeast coast of Scotland, as well as to the national nature reserves, nature conservation sites, and protected natural habitats in Aberdeenshire, but also the intertidal zones of the Firth of Forth and Cremorne Island. And this exhibition at the Edinburgh Printmakers, which is ongoing right now, Entanglements of Time and Tide, this has been conceived in 2 interconnected parts, Entangled Lives and Ghosts and Residues. So I'm going to talk about the first part first, and I'm going to start this section with a quote by Anna Zing, the anthropologist. She says that as contamination changes world-making projects, mutual worlds and new directions may emerge. And so our planet depends on the vitality of the ocean to support and sustain it. Polluted, overfished, and threatened by extractive forces, this largest living space on Earth is rapidly declining. Human-induced environmental change threatens multi-species endurance, livability, and continuity. We are all connected by shared ecologies, and entanglements with our other than human kin makes life possible. The Scottish aquatic environment, of course, is amongst the most diverse in the world. This incredible environment includes rivers, lochs, estuaries, coastal waters, and offshore waters, and is also home to many distinctive habitats and iconic species. I'm going to start by talking about this first set of work in this section, which is called Vital to Life, Drifters and Wanderers. And this is a set of engravings and laser cuts on Somerset archival paper. And these have been paired with photo micrographs, which are made at the Ascus Laboratory. The archival historical slides are from the collection of Mr. Colin Sanderson of the Art and Science Library in Summerhall. And so looking at the mysterious and enigmatic life of planktons provides several entry points to understanding larger global issues associated with the world's oceans in these troubled times. For our viewers who might not really be aware of this, phytoplankton play an essential and integral role in moderating the Earth's climate. Plankton form the basis of the marine food chain and provide 50% of the world's oxygen. Zooplankton are the animal component of the planktonic community. And in addition to linking primary producers to higher trophic levels in marine food webs, zooplankton also play an important role as recyclers of carbon and other nutrients that significantly impact marine biogeochemical cycles, which includes the biological pump. So this body of work essentially looks at the notion of entanglement as a fundamental aspect of all life. I strongly believe that in a time of many urgencies, we require cross-disciplinary inquiries about these endangered ecosystems and their microbial ecosystems and worlds that will open up curiosities about these multi-species amalgamations that constitute our worlds. And so drawing on the work of evolutionary theorist, biologist, and science author Lynn Margulis, and animal physiologist and biochemist Professor Margaret McFall-Nye, and working with environmental samples and living material from the North Sea and its tidal zones, as well as archival historical scientific material, this project explores and imagines an oceanic worldview of entangled histories, symbiotic relationships, but also contaminations, exploring creative tools for imaging collaborative survival in a more than human Anthropocene, and perhaps inspiring us all to look at life in novel and meaningful ways. And so it's clear that the inspiration for this series of prints comes from a selection of archival historical microscope slides of diatoms found in UK waters. And these slides date between 1807 and 1932. So you can see a photo micrograph on the right, which is essentially an image taken through a microscope at a certain magnification. And on the left, you see a really detailed laser cutting engraving, which has been inspired by this photo micrograph. Of course, I'll talk a little bit more about the process itself in a little bit, but this selection of slides included diatom slides from historical slide makers W. Watson and Sons, Flatters and Garnett Limited, but also slides from historical slide makers Thomas Doughton Russell, John Thomas Normal, and W. A. Firth. So these works reveal the hidden, mysterious, and wondrous world of making the invisible visible, as we marvel at the intimate and exquisite beauty and vitality of these formations. What was very interesting for me during this period was the endless possibilities through which laboratory-based research, imaging, and experiments at Asker's laboratory, for instance, could not only inspire my creative practice, but also how it translates to a rigorous studio-based printmaking practice and processes while communicating key messages. I was keen to explore these new insights, synergies, interactions, collaborative processes, and materials. The micrographs created by me at Asker's lab then inspired the making of the film Vital to Life, as well as these series of large, meticulously and intricately produced engravings and laser cuts at Edinburgh Printmakers, which were conceptualized and produced during an intensive print residency in collaboration with the printmakers from 2019 to 2021. But also, I would like to add that I was also very interested in looking at these slippages of time and the idea of navigating between past, present, and possible future worlds, but also thinking about the history of technologies and scientific research equipment and how these technologies have really come to shape our perception and understanding of the natural world. So during a good part of the 19th century, the Victorian era, a peek through a microscope could reveal very different sights than the ones we would expect to see today. In the mid to late 1800s, microscopes were not only instruments of scientific discovery, but they were tools for popular entertainment, particularly in Britain. And so there was an entire industry of inventive slide makers that had sprung up to feed this public appetite for this very new, innovative, and interesting way of seeing and noticing. But gradually after that, the popularity of the microscope began to fade away. So here you can see the details of the laser cut, and what you essentially see in this image, for instance, you have layers of the engraving and layers of cut. And so the darker brown portions that you see on the right side of the circular image, which is the diatom, those are the sections which have been more deeply engraved. And so we worked, with various layers. And how we did this was to like make these really large number of proofs, and each proof was of a certain layer, a certain color, a certain depth of engraving, and then we were all able to put it all together onto one layer finally. And so just to get this set of 10 prints ready, I think it took us nearly a year of work, all on site, but also remotely. And so I would really like to thank the studio team, which is led by Alistair Clark. They have been absolutely wonderful, and we've all worked tirelessly to produce this exhibition. Here are some more details from this. Of course, we were very cautious about, not about, the exact formation and the silicaceous cell structures, and we really didn't want to, we wanted to maintain that kind of accuracy as well. And so, so this took a lot of time, but I feel like it was well worth it. Here is another photo micrograph, another detail from one of the prints. And now we come to the non-human touch, which is another very interesting part of the same series, but touching on some very different yet interrelated aspects. And so some of my key queries for the making of this film has been the fact that I was looking at both the ethics and the politics of scientific research, but also this work sort of brings into the foreground questions of agency and ownership in relation to all living entities, but in special focus, but with a special focus on non-human lives. The film also examines contamination and toxicity in Anthropocene landscapes. And through this work, I essentially ask if contamination can become collaboration. And this film was, this work was filmed in Cremond Island. And the entry point for this film was a field visit to Cremond Island with the ASCUS lab technician and soil microbiologist, Dr. Giri Giraud. And so we went to Cremond, and we also collected several environmental samples from this site. But it was also a lot about just going on a field visit and just connecting spontaneously with the site. This work just really developed organically. Emma, I had no plans. There was no preconceived plan to make a film based on this site at all. It was just one of the sites that I'd visited. And there was just something that struck me about the site, the fact that, the way it sort of just transforms completely with the tides. And also the way that, these sort of pillars or pylons, as you would call them, that connect the beach really, or the Cremond village to the island, how this completely gets submerged, at a certain point in time, but also the fact that, how nature has sort of reclaimed these pillars. And so, it takes on a whole other new meaning, perhaps. But then, we went back to the ASCUS laboratory, and then we cultured some of these samples to view the microbes and the microbial growth here. And we were actually quite amazed to find a really huge amount of E. coli, in our specimens. And so this was a little surprising because, it seemed like such a pristine landscape. It's also an island that is completely uninhabited. And so these kind of questions come to mind, so it was very clear that there was some kind of untreated sewage inflow into this area of the Firth of Forth, and so on and so forth. And so then I started to do a little bit of research, and then I found that these waters in these particular areas are extremely polluted. And of course, there is harmful bacteria that now sort of inhabits and has sort of taken over this landscape. And potentially also, this is also now an area where it is illegal to harvest shellfish. Right. And so there is also a penalty there. And there have been several arrests that have been made in the past for people who've been up to such activities, because you could have potentially very dangerous bacteria on your plate. And so this made me think about, this kind of an Anthropocene landscape. And I think this is something we find everywhere, toxicity. This is the part of our daily lives today, pretty much. And so I think as creative practitioners, but also as human beings, we have to learn to live with this toxicity and this contamination that we brought upon ourselves, And so the question then becomes, I think the key query is that, is there a possible positive way to look at toxicity? And so going forward, what are the kind of stories and narratives that we need to weave? What kind of stories do we need to tell, for instance? Yeah. Yeah, sure.
No. I mean, your work is absolutely fascinating, Sonia, and there's so much in there, and it's really alarming to hear about the condition of the shore of the intertidal zone around Cramond Island. I wasn't aware of that well until seeing your work, of course, but it's quite horrifying, really. It seems that your work is often about really looking at the micro, the detail, and these beautiful images of that detail, but asking really big questions as well. And it's a sort of combination of the micro and the macro, and that's what's fascinating about this, is that you had the time, I suppose, to go and do the field work and work with scientists and get into the detail, and then kind of pull back, and your work invites these questions. Is that part of your process?
Absolutely, that is part of my process. It's been this way for a while now, and it's interesting for me. But then again, like I mentioned before, that I allow the work to organically develop. And so that is something, like, as you mentioned, it's something that, you understand that it takes time. And so it is something that one has to think about consistently. It's not something that's going to spring up. I don't know what is the next step often, but suddenly while doing the work, or, at some stage, there would be this spark where I would be like, yes, this is what is the key element that I'm drawn to. But also with this work, I think the thing is that I think this film also brings into focus some of my own vulnerabilities, I would say, as an artist and a practitioner, somebody who's working with this kind of lively material. And so what I have done is that I've openly talked about these vulnerabilities, as we go ahead and work in a laboratory, for instance, with non-human life. So like I mentioned, these questions of agency and ownership then become extremely important, and they're all in a gray zone. There is really no easy way to talk about, the ethics of this, but for instance, the work itself raises these ethical questions. And at the same time, while this is a part of my process, so in a way for me, it is like questioning my process again, as well as scientific research, Western science, and so on and so forth as well. So I would say that some of the key questions that came up for me is the fact that, working with biological processes and structures, this is both challenging and provocative, I would say. Mm-hmm. But working with this lively material brings it with it, again, a range of ethical, social, cultural, but also aesthetic inquiries, So some of the questions that I have raised through this film is, for instance, what constitutes life? Who gets to determine what lives are created and grown? Which are saved, exploited, or destroyed? What do we think about using this living material, such as live tissues, bacteria, living organisms, and life processes as a medium? What does it even mean to have agency and ownership over another's life? But also, what is the role of human beings as makers? What do we think about the disposal of these lively objects, which will soon become infectious laboratory waste? What does it really mean to be at risk with each other? And finally, what are the possibilities and limitations of working with other than human lives? And so what do we really think about contamination?
You have those...
this question, when does contamination become collaboration?
It's fascinating, and anyone who visits the exhibition can see the bottles on the table where this life is taking its own kind of form and shape. I'm intrigued to know how that will kind of evolve, or what happens to those pieces.
Yeah, I mean, this was something that I was extremely concerned with myself, because, you know, they are living, living material. I will not call them objects at all, but they're living material, and they have a life of their own. They have been growing and evolving and changing, and, you know, and new bacterial colonies have been forming over the past several years now. They were made in 2019. And I've also been recording the changes that have been happening within this sort of self-sustained ecosystem over these past few years. So in a way, it feels like their progeny, you know. And so, it's a difficult moment, because we do understand that ultimately and at some point that they would have to be disposed of with a certain protocol in place. But I think at the moment they will, after the exhibition, they will go back to Ascus Laboratory, and I think they will sit there at the lab for a while.
I'm also intrigued, Sonia, to learn more about what you discovered about Scotland, the condition of Scotland's water, because this was an investigation into that. And I'll share with you that a few weeks ago, I was up in the Cairngorms speaking to an ecologist, and she told me about a study they had been doing into otter spraints, the remains that otters leave behind. And deep in the Cairngorms, Scotland's highest mountains, they had found microplastic in the otter's spraint. A long way from the sea, but it was marine microplastic.
Exactly. So microplastics are really everywhere now, even in the Mariana Trench, and that speaks volumes about what we have done to our own planet. But I think the state of coasts everywhere around the world, Emma, it's vulnerable. And I'm talking from India at the moment, which is really at the front lines of climate change, and our coasts are so subject to, coastal erosion, but so are the coasts of Scotland, for instance. Coastal erosion is a really big factor, but in India, we also have the related crises of the climate refugees, for instance, and, really human infiltration into the ecosystems where, there's this large-scale infrastructure building on the wetlands, for instance, and all kinds of illegal, infrastructure development and things like that. And this is, it's just absolutely devastating, for the ecosystem, but also for human lives and livelihoods going forward. So there's no proper, in that sense, there's no proper planning at all. But even now, even during my research time at the Marine Scotland's facility in Aberdeen, this was the time back in 2019. And if I remember correctly, at that time, they were collating the marine assessment report for 2020. This was the time that all of these, this report was being put together. And so I was working pretty closely with the ecology and conservation group at the time. And also with the zooplankton specialists there. And so, one was already aware that there's a huge threat already to the plankton community in the North Sea and Atlantic. And this was, and of course, this is based on samples that have been collected from various sites they call them monitoring sites, but they're all over the coast. And there's several of them. And so they were literally, and we also understand that such reports are collated over a long period of time. So it's years and years of data, which is then collected to make a report such as this. But this particular report was particularly significant because for the first time, it was really like raising these alarm bells, because, the plankton are the foundation of the entire marine food web. So if there's a problem, whether it, I mean, there's of course there's several problems because of sea level rise, but also warming waters. So there's this migration also, but also this kind of this trophic mismatch as well in terms of prey predator, so on. So those relationships that sort of changes, and so the breeding period, the seasons, and so and it's all an interconnected cycle. And so I was trying to understand these marine food web systems and trophic levels while at the research facility. And I was able to get a broader understanding, even for myself. This was a huge learning curve and learning experience. But yes, it's not a good sign. It's certainly not a good sign, especially for certain fishes as well, like the Atlantic cod and others. Who are dependent, for instance, on certain fish, sand eels, for instance, but also the populations of birds in Scotland.
Well, we're noticing.
So with the bird, that entire marine food web cycle, which starts with the phytoplankton, goes to the zooplankton species, and then the sand eels. You have the sand eels, which is the primary kind of food for these birds, and so then the entire community of seabirds is impacted, and so it is quite alarming. Yes.
Thank you. That was an ecological web that you've shared with us, and I think that the more we understand the interconnectedness, the more hopefully people feel the need to take stock and understand their own impact on the planet. Again, so many questions. I wonder if should we continue? Do you have any more images to share?
Yeah, for sure. Let's continue with this. So next up are a couple of the gallery installation views where you can see the laser cuts and engravings. And you can see the Vital to Life film on the left, but also accompanying this and complementing the exhibition is a range of historical scientific objects from the collection of Marine Scotland. And I must make a mention of these. And so, of course, here is a detail from the Pulse Vital film.
I'm intrigued to know. Yes. I'm intrigued to know whether or not the biodiversity that is represented in these early slides is equally represented today in terms. I wonder if did that come out?
No, not with the diatoms, but yes, but with the zooplankton work, I was informed that I work with historical slides of both the phytoplankton, which is the diatom, but also zooplankton, which are the little critters. But the zooplankton ecologists, they did mention to me that, some of the slides, these historic slides, the species are probably already extinct in the wild.
Yeah.
So yes, so this is happening,
That's what
But I don't have too many details about the diatoms as such. So here are more details of these prints. And now coming to the objects. So what you see here is, for instance, a historic glass drift bottle with an accompanying card. You also see historical plankton slides from the collection of the Ecology and Conservation Group in Marine Scotland on the bottom in the center. You see a reversing thermometer with a case. You also see historical handwritten record books, but also handmade maritime charts and cross sections from 1953. These are the plankton slides. Okay. So I'm coming now to the second part of the exhibition. Should I continue, Emma? Or do you have some more questions?
I wanted to jump in with a question.
Yeah, sure.
It strikes me, Sonia, that one of the sort of founding tenets of the way you work is collaboration. And I know that both with this project and others that you've worked with many different groups. In the past you've worked with community groups and you've worked with botanical gardens and scientists and different institutes. Would you say that collaboration is an important way forward for all of us these days? And I wonder if you could talk about the different different types of collaboration that you experience within your work?
That's a great question, actually. And so I personally feel that collaboration is absolutely the way forward. In fact, without collaboration, there is no way forward at this point. And talking about my own research, I would say that I have been looking at different kinds of knowledges. And that includes, of course, Western science, but also I've been looking at indigenous knowledges from my own country. So, but also working with communities of people, as you mentioned, and these communities of people include fishermen, farmers, and the tribal communities in the southern part of my country.
Yeah.
And so I feel that this is the time that we need, all these knowledges to come together in order to raise this awareness. And I am a strong believer of the fact that art has a very strong role to play at this moment, because, as I worked more and more within these scientific institutions, I must say that, to a common person, and then of course, then when I interact with the public, it seems like, even today with all of this information that we have, it's like, climate change and climate science, these two big words, massive words. This is something that people still don't relate to on an individual basis. It's like this big elephant in the room, which is just ever present, but really nobody is addressing it on a personal level. I mean, people like to they would talk about it, but because some of this, because, it's the, people talk about it, but, it's that involvement. It's like, how do you make that involvement? And so I feel like art has a very important role to play, because storytelling has a certain power. Images have a role to play. And it's making that important connect between this important data that is being generated, which is really so important, and this complete lack of understanding of this kind of information on the other end. But I'm saying that this is not only about science communication. Of course, science communication is an important part, and I feel like art does bridge it bridges the gap. But I also feel that artists and scientists have very strongly their own position as well. We will ultimately, both artists and scientists, we want to do the same thing, but the methodologies and the processes that we follow are extremely different. For instance.
In your experience, though, have you, because I know, I'm really interested in the work that you've done with the mangrove area in India and Kerala and Tamil Nadu, and there you've worked with groups. Have you brought those groups and scientists together? Have you been a conduit, if you like, for bringing these parties together to
yes, absolutely. My project, Critical Membrane, and like many of my other projects, they're all long-term associations with the landscape. And so many years of engagement, several field visits, communication, whether that's virtually or actually physically, so on and so forth. But certainly, yes. But also, I would say that, in like scientists and ecologists in Tamil Nadu, for instance, the research institution where I was working, that's the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, they were also very strongly connected to the communities themselves. And so some of the programs that they had were very much linked with the interests of the common, the common fisherman or the soil pan worker, for instance. And there would be several modules where there would be interactions already, between the scientists and the local people. It is a really interesting exchange, I think, of these kind of knowledges. And this is why I say that, there needs to be a lot more such exchange. But also the whole aspect of, the artist also working with the institution working with the artist who's also working with the communities. And so there's this cycle, that is formed. And this is, I think, very beneficial in so many ways, but also to bring this whole kind of research into the public domain where, the artist's laboratory, I'd like to use this word, the gallery or the artist's laboratory, so to say, becomes a space for communication and interaction. It is no longer, a science laboratory where you are not allowed access. It becomes like this accessible space to have these dialogues and discussions. And I feel like making making many more such spaces is very important going forward.
Do you notice in Delhi or when you've exhibited your work about these concerns? Are people engaged? Are they surprised? Are they, with what's happening
I think what always surprises me is the fact that, we just take our natural environment for granted. And so within cities, there's always a huge disconnect. We are into this white cubed life, existence, just going to work, coming back, and just, leading this kind of, this kind of a daily routine existence that we have cut ourselves away from nature, really, and from the wilderness, most definitely. And so it was quite surprising to me that even in parts of northern India, people just didn't know too much about the mangrove ecosystems. And this is, but this comes as quite a surprise, but also people within southern India, because what happens, Emma, is that we tend to take our environment for granted. So we start to notice less.
This is true. It's funny that we had this moment last year, didn't we, where there was a pause and we saw photographs of mountains in areas, in Nepal, for example, where the smog, you couldn't see the Himalayas from Kathmandu previously, but suddenly there was this pause, which hasn't lasted very long, that was brought about by the pandemic.
No, we saw blue skies in Delhi. We saw birds. I mean, we haven't seen so many species of birds in years. We haven't seen a blue sky looking at us in years. And so I think this is the time to sort of, we are slowly coming back, but I would like to see this new normal remain the way that it is. And just this whole aspect of just slowing down a little bit, but also questioning how we want to go forward, questioning these capitalist notions of progress, really.
Do you want to share a little bit more with us? And
yeah, so I'm coming to the second set of slides, and this is called the Afterlives Rising into Ruins, and this is a series of 10 lithographs printed on Somerset archival paper. And so Anna Zing says, without stories of progress, the world has become a terrifying place. The ruin glares at us with the horror of its abandonment. It's not easy to know how to make a life, much less avert planetary destruction. Luckily, there is still company, human and not human. We can still explore the overgrown verges of our blasted landscapes, the edges of capitalist discipline, scalability, and abandoned resource plantations. We can still catch the scent of the latent commons and the elusive autumn aroma. And so humans have actively colonized and modified the earth, progressively developing more sophisticated devices and technologies. And livability in its broadest sense, not just for humans, but for all life on earth, is being challenged by these industrial ecologies we have brought into being. And so we live in an era of accelerating technological change, but with it comes these accelerated rates of obsolescence. And so these technofossils that we leave behind, these sort of material residues of the technosphere, these are driven by human aspirations, tenacity, and transmitted cultural memory. These will leave a distinctive mark on our planet. Of course, the North Sea serves as a prominent shipping zone amongst European countries and also between Europe and the Middle East. And also an important aspect of its economic importance has been the extensive reserves of petroleum and natural gas that has been discovered beneath the seafloor. And so the Aberdeen Harbour itself plays a very vital role in the global oil and gas industry and has been Europe's premier port for industry for the last 50 years. And however, today, reserves are flowing fast, but it has been estimated again that the North Sea is nearing or has even surpassed its peak production rate. So as a result, cities such as Aberdeen, now they're expected to redevelop it themselves as a research and developmental hub, rather than as a base for offshore drilling. So what one also sees in places such as this huge scale technology transfer from oil into renewable energy and other industries that is underway. And so over the next 3 decades, it's important to note that thousands of subsea wells will be plugged, hundreds of oil and gas production platforms will be detached, dismantled, and removed from the storm-tossed North Sea as they approach the end of their operational lifetime. And so during a research visit to Aberdeen and Fraserburgh in 2018, I explored the ruins of defunct marine infrastructure, decommissioned maritime objects, derelict ground, ghost landscapes, and cast of redundant objects and items of scrap from the oil and gas extraction industry. These are residues that embody a set of historical and temporal paradoxes. And so the rust and the dust on the encrusted objects draws into focus the loss of use value, where the object's worth is realized only in the processes of consumption and the disintegration and dissolution of the aura, while the oxidizing, crumbling, putrefying, and transforming power of nature slowly creates new, entirely meaningful forms. Here is a couple of more gallery views where you can see this body of work on view.
Beautifully installed.
I think so, isn't it?
These works, looking at the kind of decline of the oil and gas oil industry in the north coast, bring to mind a couple of things to me. One, that as we kind of leave oil behind, the kind of powers that be are looking at water as the next kind of really important sort of area of tension and struggle and politics, and that's a worry. And I wonder if
it's a big worry, and it's really a deep concern. It is, but even thinking about this kind of massive scale detaching and dismantling that is to start or has already started in the North Sea, for instance, how much will be dismantled, how much will be removed, how much will be left behind? What are the various impacts of this kind of large scale technology transfer, for instance? What are the impacts on marine biodiversity, for instance, on the sea floor, seabed? These are the kind of questions that are raised,
Well, I wanted, before there's a question in the chat, but before we go on to that, I guess it's only right that given I'm in Scotland and next week we have COP 26 happening in Glasgow, that I should ask you your views on that and what kind of legacy you hope, I guess, to see from COP and the role that artists might have to play in taking that forward.
So I do think that COP26 is our chance to secure a better future for all. And by all, I mean all of humanity. I think this needs to play a very big role. But we also, I mean, coming from India, I would also say that it's very important to understand what vulnerable communities and countries need from the COP26 climate summit at this point. And so clearly, we are talking about, committing to deep emissions cut by 2030, for instance, in line with the 1.5 degrees temperature target, but also the fact that developed countries, I feel like, must significantly scale up climate finance. And it is not only about scaling up climate finance, but it is also about making these funds and finances accessible. And so that accessibility is like a whole other conversation altogether. And so, making these kind of funds more accessible, but also more finance and tracking of adaptation. Adaptation needs to play a really important role, I think, going forward. But when one speaks of adaptation, we also have to see that there is already a huge amount of climate-induced losses in these countries that are vulnerable and or are at the front line of climate change, and especially certain islands and so on and so forth. And so there is already, the damage has already happened there. And so these kind of damages and these losses have to be looked on with not only seriousness, but like a great sense of solidarity going forward. But also that there has to be very strict adopting of this long overdue and sort of the robust rules for the Paris Agreement as well. But I think the most important reason why we should have these rules in place is like, the word accountability also comes into play here. So really stepping up in terms of actual action, because there is just so little time. So we need to see something, something really a positive step forward. We need more action. And so, this is what one hopes for, certainly. And I think that, artists do play a big role. The entire cultural sector plays a really big role. But also artists play a big role as humans also, and as members of the society. And so I think this is a time where I think people must stand together in solidarity across the world if we have to influence policymakers, governments, institutions and other governing bodies, for instance. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's, yes, very heartfelt, and I agree with everything and hope that those meeting rooms in Glasgow really deliver something productive. And
I think there's all eyes, on Glasgow at the moment, absolutely. So we'll find out more in the subsequent days and weeks.
Yes, we'll have to reconvene and review. So I'm going to ask you a question from Alison Grant, who says, from your experience, do you think that if we start to change the language around the way we talk about the ecosystem and the environment to talking about our ecosystem and our environment, do you think people would feel more empowered and invested in these conversations?
So she means, does she mean like talk about landscapes on a more global scale in that sense? What does she mean exactly?
I think she means that we speak about them as something other, and that rather than saying the ecosystem, we talk about it as our ecosystem and our environment. There's more of a...
Absolutely. I think this is the time where we need these kind of more and more international collaborations, across sectors to happen, where people get to engage with each other, learn about each other. It's really very important. And also something that sort of breaks these kind of so-called geographical boundaries at the moment, because literally, we are entangled with each other, and our futures are entangled. And so it's like a butterfly effect. Anything that happens anywhere in the world will have impacts going forward somewhere else. And so we must sort of realize this and work together. But also, I think we should challenge the more anthropocentric way of looking at nature. I think that is extremely important. And so we really need to look more towards maybe a biocentrism, where we are not at the center of it all. This human centric viewpoint at all points has gotten us nowhere, where we always just looked at nature as a resource. And so, a resource which is meant for extraction. And so this kind of thinking has to change.
Yeah, more interspecies.
This has to be, absolutely, the cohabitation, words like cohabitation come into mind instantly, yeah.
I wonder, I'm just looking to see my questions. Where are we with the time? We've got a few minutes left.
So should I quickly run through the rest of the slides?
Yes, that would be, yes.
Great. And so the last set of works is the Afterlife's Ruins and Rivers, which is this set of monoprints, all single prints that have several layers. I worked with these with several colors, but also with several plates, which, there's, yes, Emma,
did you actually do these in Edinburgh, or did you work
these were
with
all the prints were made at the Edinburgh Printmaker studio, and in collaboration with the studio and with Alistair Clark. Absolutely, I was working with Photolitho the whole time, and so this entire body of work has been produced at Printmakers. And so, yes, you can understand that it took us a fair amount of time because, for instance, these monoprints, these are all single prints. And so we've done a whole lot of experiments to come up with these. But also, what I was thinking of is the fact that, while these ruins are essentially residues of and gateways into the past, and the decline is a palpable and tangible reminder of the slippages and passages of time, the ruin also propels us forward in time. And so the ruined residues of bygone eras, these enable a reimagining of future scenarios and environments. And these sites of ruination then establish a framework for dialogues about a built environment, dialogues about decay, regeneration, and the notions of progress in a shifting cultural, social, and economic climate, but also investigating alternate modes of envisioning our relation to industrial pasts and indefinite futures.
I was just about to ask Janet if you were joining us. You can see that we've had a really fascinating conversation and lots of really interesting material to talk about. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, Sonia.
Pleasure's all mine, Emma. This is a wonderful opportunity to reconnect with you after quite a while, and then
yes,
it's just lovely. Thank you to Edinburgh Printmakers for putting us together through this event, I would say. Yeah.
I hope that we get to speak together in person next time.
Yes, I'm sure we will. I hope so.
Oh, you're on mute.
Janet, you're on mute. Yeah.
There we go. Sonia, Emma, thank you so much for such a wonderfully rich discussion and fascinating insight into Sonia's exhibition. And Emma, you didn't get much chance to say very much about the quite extraordinary work that you're doing too at RBG. You've initiated some amazing exhibitions and events as part of Climate House, the programme Climate House, which is designed to challenge us all to think and take stock in relation to our own impact on the planet, including, I think, a visit by Storm this weekend.
We want to tell us about that. Oh, thank you for asking about that. Yes, and it's very fitting with this subject matter. Yes, we have the giant sea goddess Storm coming to the Botanics at the weekend as part of our kind of I guess road to COP, and launching a lot of kind of workshops and storytelling around the oceans and the importance of maintaining its biodiversity. And so that's happening on Saturday at the gardens all day.
Oh, and how do people need to book, or can they just?
No, it's a drop-in. There's lots of different activities happening around the garden. And then next week in Glasgow, we have the Encampment of Eternal Hope, which is a work by Walker and Bromwich that brings together many different people under a kind of temporary encampment to talk about the climate crisis and the activities of COP. So we have a lot going on.
Emma, I'm going to, just say that I'm a huge fan of, everything that Climate House is doing. It's really incredible. It's a great initiative. So congratulations for spearheading this wonderful initiative. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you.
If if anybody wants to find out more, I think your website address is rbge.co.uk.
That's correct. Yes.
Excellent. And before we finish, we've just got a minute left. Emma, tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with COP26.
Do you mean at this weekend?
Yes.
Well, the Botanics has a stand within the Blue Zone, and there we're talking about Scotland's biodiversity. But we were also, I was working all weekend in the Blue Zone on our installations, and each of the conference rooms has plant material foraged from the botanical gardens around Scotland and other sites around Scotland. So hopefully that material, which has been arranged in an ikebana style, will inspire and prompt thought. So we have that, and then we have a lot of events, too many to list, but again, do look it up. The Encampment of Eternal Hope is running all week at the Brigate around COP and many other things. Very busy time, Janet.
and I, again, in that context, given you're doing all of that, we're really grateful that you're with us here this evening. So thank you both. That was just a great conversation.